On. And hello, everybody. Welcome to another week of Speakeasy Reviews. This is your professional orator, Sean, and his duly capable partner, Dixon.
Yeah, Sean is
And
the orator and I'm the R-rater. Fuck you. All right, continue.
so this week Andrew, you picked an interesting documentary, and I think it's right in our wheelhouse to discuss, especially after looking at the things we've looked at in the past. And it's a film called Bronies. Now I've got my notes are cutting it off, but the extremely let me
Unexpected adult fans of My Little Pony.
Yes, and it was. I don't know if it was the documentary was unexpected, but it was. This whole film was about unveiling a culture of people that I did not know existed, and when I spoke to my wife about it, it was news to her, which I guess is where you kind of came across it.
Well, and I have to say this was my second time viewing it, and honestly, I'm glad that you liked it because watching it a second time, I was thinking a little bit of uh-oh to myself because on second viewing, first of all, a lot of its effect is, as you say, when you come at it, you're like, oh my God, what? You have this sort of just agog reaction to it. Like, these are adult men and they do what now? And it loses, of course, once you know the thing and you've seen the documentary, all of the scenes that kind of bend in that direction of just making you shake your head with that kind of like, I don't believe this is happening sort of expression. They all go away. And so watching it, I have to say, for the first 20, 30 minutes, I was like, I don't know. And in fact, the documentary does not, part of it, at the time, I became aware of the documentary somehow or other, but I was aware of the Brony phenomenon slightly before then. And in part because I used to listen to, back when I had Sirius XM, the Howard Stern show. And he would occasionally get into these kinds of, because they're always sending someone to quote unquote cover conventions of various sorts comedically, right? So they would cover, Comic Cons and they always found, of course, poor, comedically pathetic people who would be more than happy to engage in an interview at extreme detail on the one hand about the thing, whatever the thing was, whether it was, and then Spider-Man in like 1970, right? And then on the other hand, then of course the next question is like, is it cold in your mother's basement or do you, and then they go, oh, right. It's all very funny. But part of what those Stern shows sort of were able to pick up on, because they would interview people coming out of something like, say, a BronyCon. And I remember this specifically with BronyCon, was they would get people to say right into the microphone, talking about how they felt sexually attracted to the ponies, which of course this documentary steers clear of. But anyway, other than that, I'm still glad that you enjoyed the documentary.
Well, I'd say I enjoyed it for the people piece. I mean, spoiler alert for the end of this. I felt like the documentary was probably given. I don't know if it was the documentary was too long because the skill set in the people making the documentary, or if the documentary was really only worth 60 minutes worth of material. But I did find myself, they spent a bit too much time with some of the animation, some of the My Little Pony thing. And I was really interested in following the people more. And I kind of went into it the first 20 minutes thinking this is interesting, the people. And then I finished, sort of I got about an hour in and I thought, I felt like they could have done so much more with this because people fascinate me and these people fascinated me. But it wasn't that the thing that actually caught me off guard. The first thing I heard that caught me off guard were the news pundits, the clips they were playing of the news pundits. And not all of them were conservative pundits, referencing, just the way they were referencing boys or men liking My Little Pony in such like, oh, that's disgusting, not on my show. And then interviewing people and saying, oh yeah, they're probably pedophiles and sexual deviants. And that was, I think that was a good way to lead in, because I thought, Christ, that wasn't my first thought. Maybe, I don't know. I was surprised that people even thought that way.
It's, And I don't know what was out there in the popular culture at the time about it, or whether people just immediately leapt to that conclusion. Like, I know that I had heard some of the, supposed bronies being interviewed and outright talking about, their feelings about the ponies. So, I
So
mean,
is there a
it
thing
wouldn't
about
have.
that then? Is there
Oh, heavens to Murgatroyd, yes.
well, see,
Listen, I mean,
my
like,
full
all you need to know, Sean, is that a lot of the art that's hosted, and I think they even mentioned this in the documentary, and they let it go by quickly without, any comment. But if you think about it, a lot of the art for this, and I'm not saying that everything on this website is sexually oriented, because it's not. It's somehow,
Hmm,
I don't know if it started that way and then expanded out, or whether someone, because of the title, whatever. The thing is called deviant art.
hmm,
But as soon as you use the term deviant, the word deviant isn't in and of itself. It doesn't necessarily mean, but how often do you hear the word deviant without the word sexual in front of it? You know what I mean? Like, it
hmm.
implies that kind of, that there's something there. And so, if you start, I mean, if you want to find pony explicit imagery on the internet, it's only a Google, type away, let me tell you.
So do you think then, and keep in mind that you're being recorded for posterity here.
Right. I'm keeping
Um,
my, let me just say here now, I do not enjoy the ponies in this way, and I have not actually looked for it, but I only say that about the Google thing because anything that you want on Google is
well, I guess from what you're saying, what I'm trying, because my whole the media I've consumed on this is solely the documentary. So
okay.
would you say that these brony cons and the because they made it a point to say that they have these huge Comic-Con type setups for My Little Pony, for anybody who hasn't watched the film. Um,
Yes.
and they're saying that the majority of them were men or boys or male. They even interviewed a female saying, do you feel like it's weird that you're a minority here, that you're one of the few. So would you say that the majority of the people there at the conference are there for just reasons, or do you think there's quite what's the word, a dark underground of people that are there, like a substantial dark
I couldn't
underground of
even
people?
begin to answer that question, Sean. I don't know. And I'm not going to, first of all, let me say this. As much as on the one hand, I am not a pony fan, and I think my reaction to this is what a lot of people's reaction
Mm,
to this probably when they first watch it is like, my God, really? And then you start to wonder, as all those pundits you talked about that they show at the beginning of the show, of the documentary, either is there something, are they just arrested children, are they emotionally stunted, is that what this
mm,
is, or is there something else going on, and you heard pundits making jokes about pedophilia, um or the possibility, not about but rather the possibility that these guys must be into like
yeah,
weird stuff.
it's not a genuine endeavor. There's
Right, yeah,
something,
there's
yeah,
something ironic about it,
subversive
correct.
underneath. Yeah.
Sure. But I don't know. I will say one thing. It's interesting that you point out because I think the stuff at the beginning of that documentary kind of tells you already. I mean, this documentary is from 2012,
Yeah.
and I feel like it shows you how far society's come. Because you're right. I don't think that they would be talked about like this even
No.
9 years later on
Yeah.
on TV. It's just one more thing. I mean, if people can dress up as Batman, really, what's the difference? You know what I mean? Like when
Yeah.
you come right down to it.
Well, that was my wife made a really interesting point. And because I was talking to her about it, and she's like, and I think the one thing we have to acknowledge, and anybody who is a quote brony who's watching this has to acknowledge, that it is unexpected, and for anybody. It's not something where you can very easily, or you should expect somebody to go, oh, okay, yeah, you like My Little Pony. I think
Sure,
there's an
right.
element where you have to accept that this is a bit out of the norm. The show is actually made. There's probably focus groups it was written for young girls. That was the actual demographic I would expect My Little Pony was
I'm
designed
sure
on.
it was,
My
right? My
wife
sister
said,
certainly had them when she was a girl.
yeah, my sisters did as well. But my wife said, if you think about it, nobody gives women any shit for liking car racing, so why would there be any problem with boys liking anything, feminine, really? It's nobody's
That's a
giving women shit for that.
it's a fair point.
Yeah.
Actually, and the other point that I was thinking was, along the same kind of like, really, we could get into value judgments here, but at the end of the day, if what's the difference between, like, I'm sitting here concerned with the Phillies who are getting destroyed right now,
Yeah.
and I'm wearing a Philly, but I'm a grown man wearing a Phillies hat.
Yeah.
I do not play for the Phillies. I've never played for the Phillies. I have no association with the team. I'm
Mm.
not likely to have any association with the team. Why have I purchased and basically rented out my body to advertise their
Yeah.
product?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And what's the difference? It is that kind of, if somebody likes the themes and the colors and the characters in My Little Pony, I don't know. I mean, if that's what makes them happy,
So
I
be
don't
it.
have. Yeah, so be it. Exactly.
Yeah.
I will say that. Well, go ahead.
Well, and I think it's a good point that this was made in 2012,
Mm-hmm.
and it really sort of ties together one of the characters using Google Maps on a printed page, which to me was one of the more surprising parts of the film. I
Yeah,
didn't
that's a
know it was
good point.
2012 at the time. I'm like, what's he doing? Why has he got paper?
And that might,
Um,
the documentary came out in 2012. It might be even a few years older than that. Of course, if he's not
yeah,
from. Yeah, yeah.
but I forget what I was going to say now. What were you going
Oh,
to say?
well, I mean, one thing. So you said you haven't looked at any other meat. So in looking it up, I was kind of wondering because I hadn't remembered exactly how long ago the documentary was. See, the thing I told you before we started recording was that time plays tricks on you, and I
Yeah.
had remembered that we had watched this at our old house in South Philly.
Mm.
And what I kind of like let slip away from me is that we moved out of there in 2014. And so I'm like, oh, geez, this has been a minute.
Yeah.
And so I had started to wonder as I was watching, 7 years is a long time. Like, what is the state of the Bronyverse? Was it a fad? Is it something that sort of was of its moment?
Mm.
And I noticed that there was a YouTube video called like The Last Brony Con, a post-mortem, a fandom post-mortem. So I clicked, I thought it might be another documentary about like the collapse of the brony culture or something like that. It turned out it was just some young girl. I don't know who she was, and they have apparently the last Brony Con was in 2019. They decided to end them with at least the main one, the big one that they show you going in like Secaucus. It eventually moved down to Baltimore. And then with the show ended in 2019, apparently. So they decided to stop doing the conventions. But what this led me down, though, was like kind of looking into like what's out there today. And I came across this Atlantic headline, which by itself, first of all, that it would even appear in the Atlantic, it's like, if you just like think about it in a vacuum, it's like so absurd. It said, I think the headline was, Bronies are ready to admit they have a Nazi problem. Just in a vacuum, that headline, imagine like being someone like who grew up in like 1970 and got clonked on the head or something, or 2000 got clonked on the head and woke up in 2021 like Rip Van Winkle and looked at that headline and was like, it would be incomprehensible. And like, what? Right? Brony score is not even a word in 2000. So, I mean, you have that issue. But what I thought was interesting, and I think, thinking back to the thing that we talked about last time we recorded, the Flat Earth documentary, which is really what gave rise to this suggestion. And the point I was making there is that, again, this Flat Earth or My Little Pony, or I think I mentioned Star Trek or whatever, all these things become vehicles for people. It's very clear the one kid, they were outright. And I think part of what made me remember it was the kid from England, who I guess not maybe far from you, based on, he was going through
Manchester, actually.
Yeah, right. Talked about, how he has Asperger's. Which is exactly what I'm talking about, right? You know what I mean? Like that these things become somehow vehicles for people with social or emotional difficulties to somehow, have an outlet,
I don't know that that's the case with all of them. I think he was a good example of, and I think they used his nuance, his Asperger's. It's not a disability. I was trying to catch myself from saying that.
Right.
His feature, as sort of a guide to how this universe has benefited somebody with the challenge that they're trying to work through socially. And a lot of the people I think I kind of got the view as the film went on, that the people were not so much, they liked the TV show, but they more enjoyed the community than the TV show. Because you know what I did? I actually tried to watch My Little Pony because there was a scene in it where one of the boys. He was like, seemed like a really good kid, 12, 14, smart kid. And he was the
Mhm.
one with the conservative dad. And the
Mhm.
reason I say conservative is they kept saying the word conservative. How would you describe him? Conservative,
Yeah.
almost as if it's like a negative term, to sort of qualify his distaste for My Little Pony. And he fit the
Mhm.
bill of a conservative dad, but I thought he was pretty chilled out about the whole thing. But even then, I remember that there was a line in it where he said, "Look, if I just get my dad to sit down with me and watch My Little Pony, he's gonna get it." And I just
Yeah,
thought, kid, you have no fucking idea.
yeah.
He is not gonna get it. It is not happening. You do not
Oh
want him
wow.
to watch My Little Pony.
I see.
But
Interesting.
but fair play to the dad. He went there. I mean, it must have been really uncomfortable for him. I can totally appreciate why it would be uncomfortable for him, and that doesn't make him a bad person.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the funny thing. Like they're trying to make the dad out to be a bad guy, but I mean, like this was the Howard.
Conservative.
I mean, the Howard Stern program. I mean, part like he would make jokes about it, but at the end of the day, I mean, one of the things he'd talk about is like, imagine being a couple of, couple. You've worked hard. You've devoted your lives to these kids, and like the kid can't get out of the basement. He's 25 years old and is like, spending time on the internet talking about like Batman and dressing up and going to Comic-Con. You're like, oh my, and like it's. I think the mistake that they maybe made in that. Well, see, that's I say mistake, but you have to. One thing I noticed about it this time that I guess I didn't necessarily pick up on the first time, or if I did, I'd forgotten, was that this was definitely a Brony apologist documentary. In
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
not only was it produced obviously in a way that's sympathetic to the Bronies, which is fine. I think that that's, I mean, if the message of the documentary is like, you know what, like this looks strange or bizarre on the surface, but I think that the lady who, and I'm sorry, I'm going to blank on her name, but she is the creator of the show that everyone's so in love with, this particular permutation of My Little Ponies. But she makes the point that what's wrong with men having a model, that for I can't call it a model for masculinity because it's clearly not intended as that, but
Mm,
rather a model for, emotional well-being or a way to be in the world that they follow, and that it's okay for men to be emotional or attuned to, sensitivities. That's all fine. That's all fine.
yeah,
What and if that's but the other thing about it is that it's actually one of the producers. She was one of the producers, as was John Delancey, who
yeah,
is heavily featured in it as one of the voice actors.
yeah.
So it what that means is that they were not taking anything like a neutral view. So
No,
it would have been more interesting in some respects, like someone giving shit to a 16-year-old kid, or whatever, that one little kid with his dad. He's 16. That's like the worst time of life.
yeah.
Who knows where that kid's going, but leave him be. If he were 26, it would be like,
You do your thing, kid. I'm gonna be.
yeah,
It's, but I think there's a difference there when you look at those 16-year-olds. I think you look at that age band. They probably more like the show, and I think when you start getting into the older people, I think they're more into the community, and it's this area that I can go and I know that everyone's going to be accepting and loving, and that's sort of the bottom line of what this community is about. When I watched the show, I couldn't get through more than 10 minutes personally. It was a cartoon. That's all it was. It was a cartoon. It was a kid's cartoon. It didn't really do anything for me. And I think part of the reason the community is more important is I can't see this show having staying power for a BronyCon for the next 10 years. Probably why it's not still going on.
yeah, and I mean that's the thing. Any of this stuff, will it stand the test of time? I mean, I would imagine there will always be a corner of the universe for Bronies. Like, if there continues to be like, there's all kinds of cons that aren't necessarily, that specific
Mm,
in terms of their target audience. So I actually go to one every year locally, and it's mostly, I mean, it's a convention on it's low rent. You know what I mean? Mostly basically it's an indoor flea market with a theme, and the
mm.
theme is RetroCon. So it's a bunch of
Yeah.
80s stuff. And I most of the time what I wind up walking out of there is like a board game or something like that, just to add to the collection and have something. But it's fun to walk. Basically, it's like walking through a museum of my childhood once a year. Oh, check that out. Or, oh, look at that.
Yeah.
I mean, they always
But
have some low rent guest or two there.
yeah.
anyway, I think you're right. Like, I don't think it can sustain itself long term. I just don't, maybe I'm wrong, but I think you're probably already, of course, the major one has evaporated. So I imagine if that one has evaporated, some of the satellite ones out in the areas outside of the United States have also gone the way of the dodo.
I think, and you mentioned retro, and I know it's not purposefully linked to this, but when I was trying to understand what the draw is, because I'm going to go on the assumption that most people at the BronyCon are genuine fans.
Yeah,
Even if
so.
there is some sort of, let's even say there's a secret sexual connotation there. Let's say they're keeping that to themselves and they're being a nice community of people.
Well, I would throw in there, and I'm not that I'm this is the Seinfeld thing. Not that there's anything wrong with that,
yeah.
But if there is a sexual attraction to the image of these little ponies, is there? I don't know that makes it somehow an illegitimate. I mean, I assume that someone who's sexually attracted to them is like really a fan of the show, as opposed to someone who isn't.
It's like anime, though. It's very anime, the show, in a way.
Oh, yeah.
The way it's voiced over. There's something, I don't know what is weird. There was something really not about the pony, but about the woman who created it, the main voice. Something kind of really attractive about her. I don't know if it was her voice or there was something about her that I don't know.
Well, Sean, I have a comment, but I guess
maybe
I'll
I'm
leave
a
it to
brony.
myself.
Maybe I'm a brony.
Let me put it. She was having a hard time staying in the frame in certain shots, if you know what I mean.
Maybe that was it. All marketing,
maybe,
right,
Sean.
So with that show, though, it reminded me of when you talk about retro, and I find that I am kind of finding things that are reminding me of times that were simpler. So here's an example. I have a Spotify mix. My Spotify mix, I keep listening to songs and I keep adding things to that mix. If I look at the last 20 songs I've added, almost all of them are from the 90s, which some of the songs I didn't really care for, but they kind of take me back to a time and place.
Sure.
And when I watched My Little Pony for the 10 minutes that I did, and I was a little bit nervous that I would get into it because of the way they sort of framed it. But for the 10 minutes that I watched it, it reminded me of coming home from school and falling asleep on the couch whilst what is it? DuckTales was on. Or when you come home from school when you're in high school and there's just cartoons on, you have a sister, I have siblings, and it's on in the background. You don't change the channel. There's no phones at the time. And it just reminds me of having these cartoons on after school as it's getting dark. And I'm wondering if there's some comfort for those people. Like there was a whole group of military people that were bronies.
Yeah, that was a big surprise. I'd forgotten about that.
And they were singing the song, so clearly they knew the show. It's not as if they were just some weird group of people that just happened to be at the right place at the right time. Right. But I just wonder if it's this safety blanket of childhood. It's kind of taking you back to, and it happens to have this community.
Well, some people would say that any retro is all about a longing for the time when you were not responsible.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When it didn't come down to you, obviously when you get home, of course, this is only, and I'm not picking on you, eternal adolescent, but when you have a child, there's no such thing as coming home and laying down and watching a couple of hours of TV. You know what I mean? When you get, no, because you either got to keep the kid entertained, or if the kid is watching TV, you got to make sure, there's always something to be done, whether it's,
this is your chance to get shit done.
Yes, exactly. Not that I never watch TV when I come home. I don't mean that, but it's generally speaking not what happens. And so any kind of retro is like that, longing for the days where basically, your life was your own. You did what you felt like doing, whether it was, watching DuckTales or, going out with your friends at 1 o'clock in the morning because, nothing else to do tomorrow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That was exciting times. I remember every Friday and Saturday night, you just didn't get home till 4, and that's just what you do. And it was a paramount time in our lives.
Of course, very fun. No, and I mean, yes, so I agree generally that there is that retro impulse. But you see, one of the things that these folks would distinguish for you, though, if you got deep into the brony community, Sean, is that they do not care for the first generation My Little Ponies, the
Oh,
1985.
the original.
And you have to notice that I think they did sociological studies, and most of the people who were bronies, at least at the time, were like under 25. So they can't be nostalgic for 1985 because they
No.
wasn't born yet. You know what I mean? So it really was about something about that show. And I'm sure they will be nostalgic for it as adults, when they look back on it, or maybe they're already starting to get to that point because the show started in 2009 or something, and it's 12 years later. But I don't think that this was purely a nostalgia impulse. I think that this is, and this is what I started to say earlier about the flat earth thing. I was expecting in the flat earth document, let's go back there, because that's kind of where this really, the germ of this for this week was. I was expecting to see the Venn diagram of Trump supporters and flat earthers to be very overlapping, to a large degree. I think I was surprised that it didn't strike me that it was as much as I thought it might be. I think I commented last week how surprised I was in that documentary at how diverse the audience at that flat earth con appeared to be. Having said that, that also could be a trick of the camera, right? Like, if people are filming a documentary, they might want to make it look more diverse than it really was. It'd be interesting to see some breakdown of statistics of like what percentage of flat earthers are also self-identified white, because they have done that with bronies, and it's like upwards of 90%.
Well, it was all everybody in that film that was there. That wasn't like a let's say a girl in like pink hair, looking like a fan of anime. Were these slightly heavy or slightly nerdy looking guys, beards, a lot of them, 15 to 30, and they all sort of had that geeky I play Dungeons and Dragons look to them, which is perfectly fine. Not a problem with that.
No,
but that was
no problem.
That was the if you were to ask me to label, what is this person into based on how they look, if I was to stereotype them, they all fit that mold.
Of course.
Everyone all across the board. It wasn't close.
Absolutely. And I have to say, I don't know, maybe more so than you. See, I'm not really, people who live in glass houses can't throw stones, right? So I have to admit, although I never played Dungeons and Dragons growing up, but I always felt sort of the pull of some of that stuff. Like it wasn't something that, like, a lot of, of course, I think like the jocks in high school would have just, pissed on it, like probably literally. I never felt that way about that stuff. I could see that it was, but I also understood that it was socially, like, it was social poison. You know what I mean? Like, if you wanted to be hanging out with the mainstream hip in with it crew, if you didn't want to be just instantly and irrevocably labeled as, like, past all hope, that you were going to stay away from Dungeons. But I even think that the seeds for what they say now, which is that nerd culture has somehow become mainstream, I in some ways I feel like was already being planted in the 90s when we were in high school. Because do you remember, and I think you might have been one of them, even maybe I'm wrong about this, but I certainly remember kids in the hallway playing Magic the Gathering. Were you a Magic the Gathering kid?
I was never. No, the closest I came to it was just before high school. I was doing a version of D&D with Marvel. So Marvel made a version of D&D, and a friend of ours, which I won't name names, but a friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, a good mutual friend of ours, was. Yeah,
I think I'm on it.
and the reason it worked, the one problem with Dungeons and Dragons is you need to have somebody who's committed to doing work for you to have fun. And this friend was always that good friend who was committed to being the sort of central component of the game, because you need to have that dungeon master. You need to have that person who's driving the story and who's leading the game, which it's no different than when I used to work at summer camp. You're not playing the game, you're leading the game. And that's why I think for me, I just was too lazy to do that when I was in high school. I was just like, I'll play, but I don't want to, tell the story.
Yeah, I'd never play. I would actually, as an adult, I think I'd be more interested in it now than I probably would have been then.
Yeah, I would definitely.
Because it just seems like it would be an interest, at least once, just for the experience of it. We did one role-playing game. You weren't there that night, but some of the crew, the mutual crew that we spent time with, it was at this girl's birthday party. This is what she wanted to do. She had a murder mystery. Ooh. And so we kind of got it. Like I turned out I was the murderer. So we got to a certain point, obviously, where the big reveal was, and everyone was going around and guessing. And of course, if no one guessed that I did it, then I won.
Mm.
So, but it was her birthday, and it turned out that she was on it, man. She was on it. She looked at me. She's like, "Well, I think whatever my character's name was, I think so and so did it because of this blah 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 blah." I looked around, I looked like left, I looked right, I bolted like hell out of that house, and like all the dudes chased me through the neighborhood, and it was great. It was like this bird's gonna fly. I remember, yeah, some names that we could talk about offline who were there. I kind of got the crap beaten out of me in the middle of the street at the end. It was
no good times.
It was. So I have fond memories of that. But let me get back to the one thing, because I keep kind of coming around to this point, but not quite making it, which is that Atlantic article. Bronies are ready to admit they have a Nazi problem. And it's that flat earth thing, right? And I was talking to my wife about it last night, as you talked with yours. And I was saying, like, because I started looking around. This is where the thing has gone, because that Venn diagram, I mean, think about the person that you just described, right? In that most of them are very, very nice. If you meet, like, my sister and I used to, back when we were, and I'm going to apologize to any listening audience that we have today or will ever have. But when my sister and I were not sensitive young people, we talked about how, like, we would run across kids who were, especially right after high school, once, we went to Catholic school. So some of the restrictions about dress and stuff, obviously, once you're out of the school, you don't have to worry about them, and hair color, stuff like this. And so one of our friends, one I think you'd remember if I brought his name up to, but, started hanging out with this crew of folks who, they were punk. They were just, today I would know what they were. I identified them as punk. And my sister ran into them at like Denny's or something. And she was she's like, it turns out, like, those freaks, they're really nice, and I'm like, yeah, you're right, those freaks. And, like, looking back, obviously I would not use that term, but the idea, in other words, that people who are into, like, in my experience, people who feel that kind of sense of disconnection from, like, a mainstream thing, tend to be actually very sweet, because I think maybe they've been picked on and they understand that, right? But within that subculture, there's always that group of, like, disenfranchised, disaffected, dissociated white male kid. And if you get enough of them together, it's just, you can do it like clockwork. There's going to be a percentage of them. So, like, apparently one of the great fan ponies, because of course fans make up their own ponies, one of them is a Nazi pony. And it has a lot of following. I'm trying to remember what it was, what its name is, but
I guess you could deduce an Aryan sensibility of My Little Pony watching it. I guess this perfect race type thing with the ponies.
Yeah, I mean, the articles in the LA, My Little Pony fans confront their Nazi problem. And yeah, I mean, a lot of the ponies, of course, are, lily white in coloring. And apparently even on the show, like, if I am understanding the article correctly, I haven't watched enough of the show, so I apologize if this is incorrect, but that the way that Black or African American, you know how, like, vocally, because of the way the races have been separated in the United States, sometimes you can vocally hear in a way that's not true even in England, that you can hear someone's race, as it were, which is, an unfortunate way of putting it, but I don't know how else to say it. Apparently, like, somehow, to the degree that there would be African Americans, quote unquote, in a world that's about ponies, which should be raceless, zebras are somehow coded as Black.
That's like, weird.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if that's coming from the show or if that's coming from the fans. So I think
that would be coming from the fans, though, because if you have, I don't know enough about the show either. It would be, I guess I would have questions if every single horse on that show was white. I could understand a question being asked, because horses aren't all white. And that could very well just be a creative choice that has nothing to do with race.
Right. Yeah. And I don't think they are all white anyway. They're all different colors, right?
No, then I have no problem with it.
Right. And I see it is true that zebras are coded as African on the show, not necessarily African American, but like when they have a zebra character on the show, it's got like African.
It's got like a Zimbabwe sort of
Yeah.
almost not South African, but a Central Africa English
Yeah.
draw.
Sub-Saharan. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Sub-Saharan
Is
Africa.
that problematic, or is that a clever way to represent zebras, or as they say over here, zebras?
Zebra. Oh, yes. Well, I don't know. I mean, on the one hand, they are from Africa, so it does
Yeah.
seem like, it
How,
seems reasonable enough.
we need to know. I think for us to be able to comment on this, we need to have a good understanding of how the zebras are represented in the show.
Yeah.
What do they bring into the table week in, week out?
Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't answer that
And if
question. So
I
you're right.
see one watermelon, we know that there's problems. We know that this is not right.
That would be correct, yes. But
Yes.
I'm sure that they were smart enough to stay away from that.
Because
I'm
zebras
trying to
don't eat
find the name.
watermelon.
I'm trying to find the name of this the Nazi pony that they've created, because apparently it's like something that they somebody created, but now has been picked up by the fandom, and so when any given fan who feels like depicting white nationalism in My Little Pony form might draw this pony with a little pink swastika on its butt, like, which is just insane, right? On one level, like, how can you possibly be somebody who's interested in a show called My Little Pony Friendship is Magic?
It's, to be fair, it's a really clever way to get together with your subversive subculture group. You're not, because it's quite well disguised in the landscape of My Little Pony.
Yeah, I suppose that's true.
It's man, this documentary has taken us on a definite turn. I think what we need to definitely address, though, is what the quality of this documentary was, because I would say the quality of the documentary itself was average at very best.
As a documentary, yeah. I mean, watching it a second time, once the shock value had worn off, obviously, because I knew what it was about, I could say it was only so. And I agree. It's longer than it needs to be. They have some filler material in there.
Too much on ponies.
Yeah, they lose the thread of the people. You're right. The people are what's interesting, not the ponies. Yeah.
Because that's for me. I don't know if he's so good at this. Have you ever heard of the documentarian? I don't know if that's the right word, but Louis Theroux?
No, I don't know that I have.
He is the most incredible documentary filmmaker. He's British. He lives in the United States, and he goes around and he gets joins like these like spends like a couple of weeks with these outcasts. So he did an episode with the what's the family of religious people that says fags are going to hell, the Westboro Baptist Church.
Oh, them, yeah.
So he spent like a good 2 weeks with them, with them, talking to them, interviewing them, and just
Braver
being
man
with
than
them.
I.
And he did this also with white supremacists, and he's got this really approachable way about him where when he questions somebody about their views, he does it in such a non-confrontational way that they open up to him. And so, for instance, he would have done this documentary slightly differently. He would have gone into the home of the conservative dad and his son, and he would have spent like the day while he was preparing, getting ready to him, speaking to the son, talking to him about getting ready and helping him getting ready, and then having a coffee with the dad, saying, "So what's it like having your," really asking questions in such a non-confrontational way that the father opens up, and he does it so well. And that's what I was thinking when I was watching this. This could have been really good had someone like Louis Theroux done this. And because you don't know who that is, that doesn't hit the mark. Maybe someone in the audience will know what that means. But I would recommend watching. I'll send you a link to the Westboro Baptist Church one. Was incredible because I think he had a big.
I would like to see that.
Anna would like it too. Very much so. But his approach is he is the best person at interviewing somebody who is disgusting, asking the questions you've always wanted to ask them in a way that lets them know that, or the way he asks questions is he questions them in a way that makes them think twice about their views without actually looking like he's making them think twice. So he's being non-confrontational, non-judgmental, but he's somehow getting that judgment in there through their own views. It's really clever. And he would have been really good for this documentary.
I mean, if he has the skill set that you say, I agree. But the only thing is, like, I guess you would see him as questioning the conservative dad and saying like, what's the problem here?
Not what's
You
the
know,
problem. No, he wouldn't say that at all. He would say,
well, I mean,
Louis
like
Theroux would
getting at
say,
what's
so
the
what is it
problem, right?
like being, you have views that are like this. I mean, what do what is it like to have your son? I mean, how does that make you feel to see your son doing this, that, and the other? And
Mm-hmm.
he would never ask none of the questions he ever asked. Now, when he gets to the end of his documentaries and he's leaving, and let's say he did one where he followed alcoholics around who were like on the edge of death because they couldn't stop drinking. He
Mm-hmm.
does get a little bit like his questions are a little bit more direct because he cares about the people, or he's probably gotten some attachment to them, and he can't leave without just sort of saying, well, are you sure this is what you want to be doing? That's about as
Right.
direct as he'll get. but
Right.
but the fact that these people invite him back in because the way he approaches it, he did one on the world of wrestling, fake wrestling, and he followed
Okay.
people trying to join the world of fake wrestling, and it's brilliant. We'll have to do
Hmm.
one on Louis Theroux at some point.
Oh, it sounds fascinating, and I look forward to
You know
this.
what? Maybe we should do the Westboro Baptist Church one.
Maybe we should. Maybe we should. In fact, I was going to recommend a religious one that I have not seen, but someone told me about. It sounded interesting to me, called Jesus Camp, about kids who
Ooh,
go away to, as exactly as it says, Jesus Camp. I have not seen it myself yet, but I have been meaning to check it out. So I'd be open to one or both of those. And by the way, speaking of things we ought to look at, I had suggested in the run up to this. I don't know if you got a chance. Did you see Brixby Bear? Did you bother? Were you able to like track
Brixby
that down?
Bear. No.
No, I put it in the Facebook. But it's a
Oh,
movie.
sorry.
No, it's all right. I'll just say briefly
I,
for the audience that
I
it
remember
might be
this
listening
now.
to.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. It's not exactly on the same subject, but it is one of the sweetest, gentlest, most impressive films I've ever come across. And it's about a kid who, for various reasons, which I don't want to give the plot away, but he's got this attachment to this character named Brigsby Bear, and he's like of an age very similar to some of the kids, like the 16-year-old we've been talking about in this Brony documentary. And what he winds up doing is, he just finds some people, friends who, aren't too judgy about it. And I won't give most of the plot away, but just to say that it's a really sweet little movie. It really is.
Mm.
I picked it at random one day to watch because it had the most interesting description. Like I was looking for a movie one night, and I'm still very glad that I did. So anyway, there's a plug for
No,
Brixby Bear.
we will have to. We've got some options on the table. I kind of like how our shows lead into different shows. They seem
Oh,
to be
for
a
sure.
nice little synchronicity with them. I think the thing I would say about this, and I think I said this to you at the start, I didn't think this was going to be an overly long show. And I think to me, that goes down to the quality of the filmmaking, which I think was disappointing. I think the subject and the people, I wanted to learn more about them. And where I was disappointed in this film was there was so much more I could have learned about each of the people in the film that were being interviewed. We only got a little taste of it. We found out they had a good time, shocker, and then they went home, and that was it. And we learned about
Yeah,
what a brony was. And
yeah.
I just didn't get enough of what was going on in the film. There was points where I was looking at my phone. So it didn't even keep my interest the whole time.
Mm.
It was that lull in the middle. And I think if I were to score this film out of 10, it's an awkward one because it kept my interest solely because of the people. It had nothing to do with the filmmaking, but I'd give it like a 5.8.
5.8.
Yeah.
That's very specific. And I got to tell you, I was concerned coming into this. Like I said, that the documentary was not going to be, because I had sort of, said it was a good one. And then, we talked about it and you said, well, let's do it. And I went and looked at it on IMDb first just to see where I could find it. And then looked at the rating. I was like, oh my God, if it gets a 5 on IMDb, that's really like a 2 or 1 in real life, because like,
those are perfect ones to do though. I think that is our wheelhouse right there.
what, the 5 on IMDb?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good, because really what I like talking about this is I like talking about what it could have been. And I like the fact that in this film, the characters that they picked were endearing enough to carry the film that I was glad that we picked it. So
Right.
but I think that's down to the characters, and I think it's a bit of an indictment on the filmmakers.
I think you're really on the mark with all of that, because you're right. The best parts of the film are, the people they found are all interesting and appealing, you know,
Yeah.
in different ways. I mean, I remember being the first time being very impressed with the kid from Manchester,
Yeah.
but this time I was really impressed with him and the kid from Maine and the
Yeah.
kid from North Carolina. I thought all three were very compelling in their own ways.
Yeah.
And you're right, we didn't get enough of them. And there was, it would have been interesting to follow them. You're right. That's what's really missing is let's hear what happened after Brony. I mean, I understand that they, you know, for various reasons, probably want BronyCon, if you're thinking about film construction, to be the end, sort of the climactic moment
Mm.
in one sense. But in another sense, what's most interesting is, well, you know, the contrast and how does it affect their lives once they see that there's a wider
Yeah.
world out there, that it
Yeah.
isn't just this narrow. So, having said that, I agree that as a film, and I think, you know, keeping in mind again that the people behind it, I think, were Brony apologists.
Yeah.
I have to say, yeah, it's more like a
I think you're,
5.
yeah. I not knowing that sort of subversive part of the culture. It was definitely knowing a little bit more from your feedback, thinking about it. It was definitely a one-sided film. Now, I think part of that is down to the character study because I think you could have made it a no-sided film. You could have just made it a fly-on-the-wall documentary
Well, there's also,
without.
I mean, it's like Bronies, if we must say, are you know, they're like everybody else. They come in every variety, right? And there's those guys, like a lot of the kids that they're following, who seem like perfectly nice people, who are being harassed for being into something, which is
Yeah.
insane and ridiculous. But I think it's equally compelling and interesting that because, you know, I don't care what the fandom is. You can always argue that there's a touch of there's an obsessive quality to anybody who gets into anything to that
Yeah.
extent.
Yeah.
And what is the psychology behind that, and what not only does it, what does it, how does it create the people who are like way into My Little Pony or Star Trek or Flat Earth, but also what does it imply for those people outside of those worlds, right? So like
Yeah.
looking at like how do you get from My Little Pony to fascism is sort of an interesting kind of question.
And that should have been one. And if the filmmakers weren't apologists, you would think. No, to be fair, that may have not have been a thing in 2012 anyway. So that may be a totally different time. There may not have been brony Nazis for all we know. But if there was a brony Nazi situation, a good filmmaker would maybe at least interrogate that, and you could still be pro brony and interrogate a brony Nazi group.
Yeah, fracture, you know, factions within the Brony party. I mean, this is very
Yeah.
important.
So I guess you said 5. I said 5.8.
Yeah, I'm surprised you give it like because I think 5. Yeah, I think 5 is as
I give
high
it a
as I can
5.8,
go.
and my 0.8 that gives it above average because it wasn't like terrible as far as how it was. It wasn't terrible.
It was eminently watchable.
Yeah.
I will say one other thing about it. Like, I think it was I remember at some point on Facebook, I posted in my years on Facebook that one day I realized that there basically wasn't a nerd convention I wouldn't go to, and I think it might have been watching this film that is that what gave rise to that comment. Because what I mean by that is like, and what I think John, one of the actors, talks about this, but they're right that there's this tremendous energy about the thing, like just going to be around people who are in love with something,
Yeah.
even if it's not something that you're into. Like, I enjoy seeing people enjoy something that
Yeah,
much.
I agree. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And that's why we like seeing people happy. Like my favorite clips are watching, like let's say Anchorman blooper reels because I like watching people laughing, and it's seeing people smiling and happy. It's very cathartic. And it's something I think they could have done more in the film, but that 0.8 was definitely down to my respect for the people they were filming. So I think it was a good choice this week. Next week I'll message you because I think it's my turn this week, and I'm leaning towards finding that Louis through Westboro Baptist Church documentary because I think it would be an interesting one to talk about.
We're going down a dark road to the obsessive. We'll go from that to Jesus Camp. I've got one for you, but it's fascinating, but it's 4 hours. It's 4 parts, 4 hours long, and it's mind bending. It's a documentary, and it's actually a British produced documentary called The Century of the Self. I've watched it several times, and it never gets old.
Well, you can actually, if you want to, it's my turn coming up. It's your turn the week after. You could set that marker now, and I could try to fit that in over the next 2 weeks.
Well, it is a 4-hour one, and that
Mm,
one I think we would need to do multiple episodes on because that one, like we started, we've done some stuff here like Superman 2 and Back to the
mm,
Future. These are fun things.
mm,
Century of the Self is deeply fascinating and richly interesting, but it's not
mm,
what I would call lighthearted entertainment either. So
mm.
I think we have to consider, where do we want to go? Um, but
And
Westboro Baptist Church, we'll start there.
well, right now we have 0 subscribers. We have 5 views per video. Although
I
we've
see.
just gotten, I've had a rough couple of weeks, and I'm back on the train. We've got our Donner video published now. It's
Ooh.
taken a couple of weeks for me to get back in the game. See how many views that's done since that's been published.
Ooh.
1. Okay, so we're flying. All
Yeah.
right. So I think part of it, and that's fine. That's what happens with every channel. We're not on the algorithm. We're not getting picked up, but we need to keep making stuff. But I really like that, and if anybody's watching this, of those 5 people that watch these videos, please put in the comments what it is you want us to review. I think from our
Oh, good
perspective,
idea.
what we're doing here, and I think it's something that's really working for us, is we're using the film or the documentary or whatever it is we're talking about as sort of the framework for the conversation we're having. So if there's anything you want us to talk about, and we will be starting to go live in the next week. So if you want to join us on the call, join us on the call. I sound like I'm at work. If you want to join us on the show, please do jump on when we go live, and we'll take any comments you got.
I like it. And I kind of do. I agree with you. I like the format where this thing prompts a conversation, which then prompts the next thing that we talk about.
Yeah.
Because it kind of then follows sort of a philosophical, there's a thread between each episode.
Synchronicity even to it.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. All
Well,
right. So Westboro Baptist Church it is. As far as Century to Self, let me think about that one because I don't know. Let's see what the conversation about West is,
yeah.
how that goes and go
Because we
from
can
there.
go to that other film, the Jesus camp film as
We
well, which
certainly
sounds
could.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, thank you everybody for tuning in. Look forward to seeing you again. Please do subscribe. We are beggars for subs right now, so please, even if it's like a pity sub, I'm happy with that.
I love pity.
Yeah. So Dixon, thank you so much this week, and we will catch up with everybody soon. Take care, everybody.
Thanks. Bye, all.
And it's done. That's all right.